If you could go ahead and go to the first. So I'm M.Mack, I go by Mac. I'm the author of one full-length collection of poetry called Theater of Parts and 3 published chapbooks. My work is very much about being trans and taking apart my body and the body and gender itself and maybe putting it back together. I'm going to be reading some grief and gender dysphoria poems, so I wanted to bring at least a little bit of whimsy with this first image here. Art making is really important to how I think. Over the last 5 years or so, I've been having to reimagine my relationship with art and with writing. I got ill in 2017. I became physically disabled in 2018. So like operating a camera is not a thing that I can do as often as I once could, things like that. So I've been kind of reimagining. These days, I mostly, my art practice mostly consists of crochet, which has been really exciting because that is using my hands, and Zentangle sketchbook type things. But once upon a time, I was always sewing these felt plushies, which you'll see with some of the poems in a little bit. When Cathy invited me to do this, I really wasn't sure what approach I wanted to take, but it's been really good for me going back through things and thinking about the relationship between art and writing. And so I picked 3 things to talk about where they really influenced each other. So you can go ahead to the next slide. The first poems I'll read, I never really published. A dear friend of mine died when we were in our early 20s, and I still make a lot of art about it. The poems are from a couple of years after these photographs, but they reference the photographs. And yeah, so these first images you see are color negatives that were processed in slide chemicals. So they were cross-processed so that the colors would come out wrong and the contrast would be too much. And like the light looks really weird, like the street lamps in this one. This one's a little too pretty, but if you go to the next one, it's a little bit better of an example. So these images were all taken right after Brian died, at the funeral, at memorial events that we had, things like that. So in this one, Brian's twin brother is performing a song, and there's a photo slideshow, and the way Scott's in front of the screen, Brian's face is projected on his shorts. So I really like that one. Anyway, so this first poem talks about this project, and then the photos I'll show afterwards. But if you could go to the next slide, please. On the occasion of the happy birthday of death, as Corso would say, speaking to a student journalist. Is he in any of these pictures? They were all taken after his death. Is he in any of the pictures? I point to the urn. I guess he's in that one. The pictures feature pictures of Brian among us as we grieve. I spend Sundays with him in the darkroom, printing photos I took 2 years before his death, dancing in a skirt in my living room. The project left out faces, shot models below the neck. I regret this framing limit. Wish I had let myself slip once or twice. Last week, I found one with his chin, the thrill of it, the imagined rest. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see the image with the sliver of chin. This is just a photograph of a test print. There's so much joy in that pose that I just really wish I could see his face. And I really love that poem. I wrote it a long time ago, but I think of that last line a lot. And it was the first thing I thought of about kind of the intersection of art and poetry. If you go to the slide after that, you'll see the final image from that project. So the one with the chin is an outtake from the series that this one ended up appearing in, which, showed really gendered body parts with really gendered clothing. And this is one of my most favorite things I've ever made. Yeah. So I'm going to read one more grief poem, and then it's called Each Loss is Every Loss. I have learned to remember fear, evade destruction, talk theory. His ashes were in wood. What this is, this lesson, dress fierce for the funeral, rainbow sparkle eyelashes, a tiara on top. Losing is disaster. Settle, settle, settle. When I lose and I focus on remains, a framed photo staring, and the refusal to lose. He lost his job like he lost what I love and me. His ashes were in cardboard. He made little wooden boxes, his favorite machinery, and sometimes injury. His ashes were in wood, a tiara on top, a framed photo staring, and me. I have learned what this is. Losing is disaster, and the refusal to lose. His ashes were in cardboard. I have learned this lesson. When I lose what I love, I think of you, Dad. So the next slide just shows what that poem looks like. It's like modeled after a bingo card, so it can be read in bingo directions. So lots of itineraries. So yeah, the next slide is a little bit lighter. I wanted to show you Milk with Toast as more herself first before I showed the image from the poem. I have sewn many of these plushies. Milk with Toast is one of the main characters in my book, Theater of Parts. She is based on the word milk toast. She is a combination of Casper Milquetoast, which is where we get the word from comic strip in the 20s, and Milk Toast, the purple cross-dressing cockroach in Berkeley Breed's comics in the 80s and 90s. I found him through a friend of mine. So the next slide shows the one I made as a gift for my friend. And I wrote this poem. I wrote a lot of poems about this plushie, but this is the one that ended up in the book. Oh, and my character pronounces the middle syllable. So my character is Milk with Toast. Interlude. When Milk with Toast scaled the crepe myrtle. The man Milk with Toast loved lifted him into the tree, then arranged his legs and cane around the trunk to hold him up. Milk with Toast allowed this. As Milk with Toast straddled the thin, stocky trunk of the tree, as the poet observed him, Milk with Toast considered his life, considered a new construction of felt and thread, remembered when he was a man collapsed into himself, when he lived inside the poet's collapse. Milk with Toast wants to be large, to feel large. There, astride one slim trunk of a large tree, Milk with Toast wanted to scale the tree down to his size, his scale. Milk with Toast wants to stall, to be not stalled. Milk with Toast wants the man or the poet to pick him up again, to be in hands, to be small in hands. So this, the one that you see here was kind of a combination of my book project and my friend's book project, which was a like Charlie Chaplin, Little Tramp inspired thing. So that was the first plushie that I sewed. And then I sewed many others that were more like the way I saw the character. But that was the first time I understood how a physical object that I made could influence my internal imaginary understanding of that thing. So I made plans and sketches to sew up the rest of the characters in the book, but I never did that. But Milk Toast comes with me to all my events, so that's good. So the final project I wanted to talk about, if you go to the next slide, this is a book object closed, and then the next slide shows it open. This was a collaboration with an artist, Melissa Hill. for a call and response exhibition with artists and writers. The theme of that year was parallel lives. And I was working on a big pile of messy fragments at the time about shadow selves and being a trans man who kind of wanted to marry a straight cisgender man, but kind of didn't. And Melissa wanted to make a book object like a specimen tray. So we collected all of these kind of representations of domestic space and put them in this tray. And down the center of that tray, there's a bound stab book that I designed the poems to kind of run in a continuous skinny little piece. And then the two corners have the fragments on little vellum squares that are, invite to be shuffled through. So this was like, I didn't know that those little fragments were ever going to become anything. And then I made this book. I mean, she made the object, but I, worked the manuscript into this object, and it made me see that I could make something out of all of those tiny little things. So this ended up becoming my chapbook Imaginary Kansas, which has very nice callbacks to Henry's first poem with imaginary spouses and kids and farms. In the spirit of this project, though, I'm going to read a few from the book and one newer one that isn't in the book. To the tune of Night. When the daughter we won't have starts laughing in the middle of the night, I try to follow the sound through the shadow of the knot house. Your silver outline snores and snores. I try to follow that sound too. I am always seeing people who are not you. You have echoes everywhere, your boring bald head, your body that I want and that I want to be my body, your plaid on your geometry, angled and exact. To the tune of Mutability. When Anne-Louise laughs all through the night again, I tell her, hush, Lou, shh, Al, shush, Annie. A shadow can be any gender. A laugh's shadow is very loud. When I combine the names of all that I am missing together into one outward breath, it sounds a bit like a hallelujah. To the tune of Time. I am out shoveling snow with my neighbor friend. He says his 14-year-old did most of the work. He says this is a long game. When you're 19, you have a kid, then wait for them to grow up and shovel the snow for you. I am not 19. When I was still babysitting his now 14-year-old. I start to think of Anne-Louise then, and I want to tell him, Anne-Louise can't help me shovel snow. She's made of it. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Mac. Such real variety. Again, I keep saying the same thing, but it's today is maybe the most varied of the different kinds of collaborations between art and poetry, and also just different kinds of art. So I really appreciate that.